I'm Linda Shaw, and I suppose you could say I was always the kind of woman who noticed things. Not the big moments everyone points to in family photos or holiday cards, but the small things. Like how people shift in their chairs when you speak, or how their tone softens when they think you're too fragile to handle the truth. It happened on Thanksgiving. I was standing at the head of the table, the same table Frank and I saved for, sanded down, and stained ourselves after we bought the house. I had just reached for the cranberry sauce, one of the few things I still made from scratch, when Brooke leaned across the table and took the serving spoon right out of my hand. "You've had enough, Grandma." That's what she said, smiling but not really smiling. Her voice was light, like a joke wrapped in something sharper. The room froze, forks in mid-air, and for a second even the baby stopped babbling, as if the air had shifted. My son, Matt, didn't look at me. He just kept staring down into his glass of wine like he was trying to disappear into it. Brooke set the spoon back in the dish like she'd done something gracious, then poured more wine into Matt's glass. "Some of us still have an appetite," she said, laughing, but it didn't land. Not really. I folded my napkin slowly, the way you might smooth out something wrinkled that can't be repaired. I adjusted the sleeve of my cardigan, the one with the little pearl buttons. The cardigan I wore every Thanksgiving for almost 20 years. I said, "Excuse me." Nobody looked up. Nobody stopped me. I walked away from that table like a guest, not the woman who built that kitchen from scratch with 2 working hands and a heart full of family. The walls in the hallway were still moss green, though a little more faded now. I'd painted them myself after Frank passed, hoping to breathe some new life into the house. But even those walls felt quieter now, like they'd learned to hold back too. In the kitchen, the dishwasher hummed gently. I opened the back door and let the cold air hit my face. It smelled like wet leaves and something else, something cleaner, like honesty. I didn't cry. I didn't break down or scream. I just breathed. And in that moment, I felt something shift back into place inside me, something I didn't even know I had lost. A sense of steadiness, a quiet, kind of sharp. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was recognition, like waking up from a nap you didn't know you were taking. They didn't know what that moment meant to me. To them, it was just a passing comment. Just Brooke being herself. Just Matt not wanting to make waves. But to me, it was the first time I truly saw it. Saw the way I had slowly disappeared from the life I helped build. Not all at once, but little by little. Until I became someone whose presence was optional. Whose voice didn't matter. They thought I wouldn't notice. That was their mistake. I stood there at the back door with the cold creeping up my sleeves, and I made a quiet promise to myself. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't explain. I wouldn't shout. But I would not disappear. Not for them. Not like this. Sometimes, the first crack doesn't come with a scream. Sometimes, it's the silence that splits the room in half. And that day, that moment with the cranberry spoon, that was my silence. The beginning of the end they never saw coming. The house wasn't just a house. It was the first real thing Frank and I built together. We bought it when Matt was 7, after years of renting apartments that always smelled like someone else's memories. It wasn't big. 2 stories, creaky stairs, and an old oak tree in the backyard that dropped more leaves than seemed reasonable. But it had bones. Solid, beautiful bones. Frank used to say the house reminded him of me. Quiet from the outside, but strong where it counted. We put everything into that place. Weekends sanding cabinets, long nights laying tile with aching knees and takeout containers stacked in the sink. I still remember the summer we stayed up until 2 in the morning repainting the baseboards because the white we chose looked more beige in daylight. That house carried every version of us. The early years when we didn't have 2 dimes but laughed like millionaires. The middle years when work, bills, and a growing boy filled every inch of every day. And the later ones, when Frank got sick and everything slowed down. After he passed, I couldn't bear the thought of selling. It was still full of him. The grooves in the floor where his boots used to rest. The shelf in the garage he insisted on leveling 4 different times. I kept it all exactly how it was, down to the dented cookie sheet he used to roast peanuts on in the fall. When Matt got engaged, it felt like the right thing to do. Offer the house, give them a real start. I remember how his face lit up when I said it. He looked just like the boy who used to build Lego cities in the living room and run barefoot to the mailbox on Saturdays. Brooke was polite, enthusiastic even. She said all the right things, thanked me with that sweet smile of hers. Said it was generous, said they'd take good care of it. I nodded and smiled back, but I also called Deborah that same afternoon. Deborah Klein and I taught together for almost 15 years before she left to practice elder law. She was sharp, steady, and never missed a detail. I told her I wanted to give them the house, but I also needed to protect myself. She didn't blink, just asked when I wanted to meet. We structured everything with care, a revocable life estate. It meant I kept legal ownership but let them live there. My name stayed on the deed. I had the right to live there for the rest of my life. I could reclaim the property at any time. It wasn't about control, it was about safety. I wasn't giving my life away, just because I was giving them a head start. The day we signed the papers, Brooke barely skimmed them. She flipped through like it was a formality, already talking about curtain colors. Matt didn't read them either. Just rubbed the back of his neck and asked where he should sign. Deborah slid the documents to me last. Her eyes met mine for a second longer than necessary. I understood. This wasn't just paper. It was a boundary. I held the pen, paused, and pressed it to the signature line with just enough pressure to mean something. I'm giving, I thought, but I'm not surrendering. At first it went well. They redecorated, moved in their furniture, added throw pillows that looked like they belonged in magazines. I moved into the downstairs suite with the lilac wallpaper I'd chosen back. When we thought we might use it as a guest room, it felt strange, but manageable. I kept telling myself it was just a transition. For a while, it felt like we had an understanding. Brooke made dinner sometimes. Matt offered to mow the lawn even when I'd already done it. They said thank you. They included me. Or at least pretended to. I tried not to read too much into it. People get busy. Families shift. That's just how life works. I still made the cranberry sauce every year. Still watered the roses out back. Still baked cornbread the way Frank liked it. I thought maybe that was enough. That if I stayed useful, stayed small, I could keep a place in their version of the future. But houses aren't just walls and windows. They're stories layered in paint and floorboards. And slowly, piece by piece, my story was being painted over. The bookshelf I built by hand disappeared one day, replaced with a metal one that matched the new decor. My quilt vanished next. Brooke said it looked too worn. Even the smell of the place changed. It used to be cinnamon, coffee, and dust in the corners. Now it was lavender spray and something sharp from an online brand Brooke followed. I said nothing. I adjusted. I thought I was being graceful. But something inside me knew. I had given them the house, the space, the opportunity. What I hadn't given them was the right to erase me from it. That right was mine to keep. And one quiet evening, sitting alone in my lilac-walled room, I looked around and realized exactly what this house still was. Mine. Not out of stubbornness, out of truth. Because love, even when given freely, does not mean you no longer matter. I thought about that signature again. The one I pressed down gently but firmly, like a reminder. It was never about holding on out of fear. It was about holding on to who I was. And maybe, just maybe, they were about to find out what that really meant. It didn't happen all at once. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, no big scene. Just little shifts that most people wouldn't even notice if they weren't the ones being erased. It started with the bookshelf. The walnut one Frank and I built together the summer Matt broke his arm falling off the swing set. One morning, it was gone. In its place stood a chrome shelving unit lined with pastel candles, fake plants, and books that had never been opened. Then came the quilt, my wedding quilt, faded in the corners and fraying at the edges, but stitched with pieces of our old clothes, every square holding a memory. I asked about it one day. Brooke smiled too brightly and said it was too worn, that she'd donated it. Next, the photo disappeared. It was one of Matt's 3rd birthday. He had frosting all over his cheeks, and Frank was laughing in the background. I kept it in a frame in the hallway, just outside the kitchen. One afternoon, it was replaced with abstract art. Red lines on a white background that looked like someone screaming in silence. Even the air felt different. My house used to smell like cinnamon, fresh bread, lemon oil on old wood. Now it smelled like lavender disinfectant, and those eucalyptus candles Brooke ordered in bulk from some lifestyle influencer. Everything soft had been swapped for sharp. She never asked. Never told me. I'd wake up and something would be missing. A chair from my reading corner. The old clock that ticked a little too loud. The worn blue rug at the foot of my bed. Each time I opened a drawer and found it emptier, a part of me folded in. It wasn't just things, it was words. Brooke stopped saying our home. She started calling it the project. Then the house. Then, eventually, my kitchen. The guest suite became the back room, my room. The thermostat password was changed. My favorite tea vanished from the pantry. She rearranged furniture when I wasn't home. Told me we needed a more modern layout. Moved my things to less visible corners. Said the place looked cleaner without all the clutter. When I asked about my antique mirror, she said she sold it on Facebook Marketplace. Said it was too heavy and probably not safe for someone my age anyway. It wasn't cruelty. Not exactly. It was erasure. Slow, intentional, quiet, and every now and then she'd say it out loud in front of someone else. Not harsh. Just enough to land. Not every retiree gets to live rent-free in a place like this. She should be grateful. I never argued. I just nodded. But I started writing things down. I bought a small yellow notepad and kept it in the drawer by my bed. I titled it in my head, "What They Think I Don't Notice." And every time something vanished, I made a note. The missing blanket. The changed Wi-Fi password. The new mail key I didn't receive. Matt never said anything. He was always busy. Long hours at the office, late-night work calls, headphones in during dinner. When I asked if he noticed the bookshelf was gone, he blinked like he was trying to remember what had been there. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was watching. And the more I watched, the more I saw. One morning, I opened the fridge and found a sticky note on the milk. It said memory meds with a little smiley face. But someone had drawn tiny horns on the smiley. I stood there with the door open, letting the cold spill out, and felt something twist inside me. That same day, Brooke announced she was going to renovate the hallway. Said it needed to feel less dated. I nodded. But I watched her walk past the family wall without glancing at it. A week later, the portraits were gone, replaced with a long mirror framed in gold. I used to walk that hallway every night before bed. Used to touch the edge of each photo. Now I avoided it. It felt like walking through someone else's home, like I was trespassing. Brooke spoke louder around me. Slower too, as if I were hard of hearing or just a bit off. She would say things like, "Don't forget your morning pills," in a voice too cheerful to be genuine. Or she'd look at Matt with a tight smile and say, "I was doing so well for someone my age." I didn't correct her. I didn't push back. I just wrote it all down, folded my words into that little notepad, and slid it back into the drawer every night. I thought if I kept quiet, it would stop. That maybe she'd tire of the performance. That Matt would notice. But silence didn't protect me. It only gave her more space to rewrite the story. I stood in a house full of my own memories and realized none of them were visible anymore. They'd been packed away, sold off, covered up. I was a ghost with a body, present but unseen. And the worst part? I had let it happen, bit by bit, smile by smile. I had thanked her for things I already owned. I had stepped aside to make room in a house that was still legally mine. They didn't throw me out, they just made it so I barely existed. And in that quiet space, I finally heard it clearly. The sound of myself being written out. Not loudly, but line by line. I used to grade high school essays. 30 years of ink-stained fingers and red pens. I learned early that patterns matter. That the truth hides in small errors, quiet shifts in tone, details no one else thinks to double-check. So when Brooke started changing things, I didn't react. I observed. I watched her face when she smiled too quickly. Listened when her compliments landed with an edge. I started to notice how often she referred to me in the third person when guests were around, as if I weren't in the room. The sticky notes were what tipped me off. One morning I opened the fridge and found a note taped to the milk. It said, "Take your memory meds," followed by a smiley face. A few days later, another appeared on the bathroom mirror. "Don't forget your name today, Miss Daisy." She said it was a joke, just playing around. But something in the way she laughed made it clear the joke wasn't for me. That's when I bought the binder. A 3-inch black one with reinforced edges and color-coded tabs. I kept it in my closet, beneath an old sewing box no one had touched in years. The first tab I labeled was verbal manipulation. Under it, I slipped the sticky notes into plastic sleeves. I printed screenshots of text messages she sent to her friends, describing me as forgetful and fragile. I saved a note she left on the nightstand that said maybe it's time we have the talk about a care facility. I didn't confront her. I had nothing to prove. I was gathering. The next tab I labeled medical interference. That started when I went to refill my prescription and was told my plan had changed. Higher copays. Fewer covered meds. I hadn't requested any changes. When I checked the paperwork, I saw Brooke's email listed as the contact. I dug through the kitchen trash and found the pharmacy letter with a sticky note that said "handled this for you." I highlighted every change, circled dates and discrepancies. I printed her email confirmation. Then I went and retrieved my old insurance ID from a box in the garage. I scanned everything and tucked it into the binder behind the label. My mail stopped arriving reliably. A week would pass without bills. Then I found a piece of mail addressed to me in the recycling bin with a yellow forwarding sticker. I checked the return address and realized it was a hospital bill from a follow-up appointment I hadn't seen. I went online and checked the settings. The primary mailing address had been updated to Brooke's email. I printed that screen and made a new tab, Financial Rerouting. I took photos too, not of her, of my missing chair, of the jewelry box that had been emptied and refilled with costume pieces. I had pictures of the rug that vanished, the antique mirror that reappeared on a local resale page. I didn't post them anywhere. I just stored them on a password-protected drive and copied them to a flash drive I kept in my sewing kit. There was no shouting, no arguments, only silence, and the quiet work of a woman who'd seen how power works when no one's paying attention. I knew she thought I wouldn't notice, that I'd slip into some slow fog and forget what used to be mine. But what Brooke didn't understand was that I'd spent decades watching students hide answers in their sleeves and fake citations in research papers. I'd seen the quiet tricks, the subtle ways people rewrite stories while pretending to care. One afternoon, she asked me if I remembered to lock the front door. Her tone was sweet but slow. I smiled and said I couldn't quite recall. That night, I installed a camera inside the mantel clock. Just one. I didn't need more. One truth, at the right moment, is stronger than 100 accusations. Every entry I made in that binder was dated and signed. Not for a judge. Not even for Matt. For me. To remind myself that I wasn't losing my grip. That someone was trying to unwrite me, and I wasn't letting them. I added a tab called Psychological Undermining. That's where I placed the printout of a grocery list I found in the freezer, placed there by someone else. It wasn't mine. She left it there on purpose. I found another list where she'd circled household supplies and written in my shaky handwriting, but it wasn't my handwriting. The worst one was a note tucked under my bedroom door one evening. It said I'd always be welcome even when I didn't remember who I was. I held it for a long time, not because it hurt, but because it confirmed everything. I took that note and slid it into a fresh sleeve. I labeled the page projection. Then I placed it right behind the sticky note with the devil horns on the smiley face. Side by side they made sense. I didn't cry over any of it. I didn't scream or threaten. That's not who I am. I was trained to look for the whole picture before making a judgment. I believed in evidence, in structure, in timing. And the truth is, I wasn't collecting proof to win an argument. I was preparing for the moment when I'd need to reclaim the narrative, when I'd no longer ask to be heard, when I'd show them what I'd been writing down while they thought I was forgetting. It started with a grocery list I wrote in cursive and left in the freezer, right next to a bag of frozen peas. Brooke found it and held it up like a trophy, waving it in the air as if she'd just discovered a missing clue. I watched her from across the kitchen, nodded slowly, and said I must have been distracted. Next, I burned the toast. Not black, just enough to set off a faint whiff and make her wrinkle her nose. She tossed it in the trash without a word, then patted my shoulder gently. I apologized and smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't ask forgiveness, the kind that knows exactly what it's doing. I started calling her dog by the wrong name. Repeatedly. Once I called it Henry, another time Pepper. The dog didn't care, Brooke did. She corrected me each time with a nervous laugh and a glance toward Matt like maybe they should start thinking ahead. I let my phone ring on silent while she was in the room. Pretended I didn't hear it. Pretended I didn't notice the missed calls either. Then one morning, I stood in the middle of the hallway and asked what day it was. I could see her face shift. Not alarmed, just interested, like she was watching a crack form in the ceiling. I started wearing my cardigan inside out, slipped the tag up front, and walked around as if nothing was wrong. Once, I put salt in the sugar jar. Another time, I opened the dishwasher and asked why the washing machine sounded different. Her voice took on a new tone after that, high-pitched, careful, like she was explaining things to a child who might wander off. "You okay, Linda?" she asked one morning while placing vitamins beside my plate. "You didn't finish your toast." I told her maybe my appetite was shrinking along with my memory. She gave me a look full of performative sympathy and walked away humming a song I didn't recognize. A new sticky note appeared on the fridge that afternoon. "Don't forget your memory meds." This time, the smiley face had devil horns again. I peeled it off slowly, folded it twice, and placed it in my binder under Psychological Undermining. Then I went to my room, opened my drawer, and circled a date on my calendar. Dr. Patel came highly recommended. A quiet man with calm eyes and a slight accent that made everything he said sound like it carried more weight. He ran me through every test. Word recall, pattern recognition, reaction time. I answered each question without pause, without flinching. I let him see what Brooke never would, that I wasn't confused. I was prepared. After the exam, he smiled and said I scored in the top percentile for my age group. I asked for the results in writing, 3 copies. He didn't ask why, just printed them and handed them over in a neat folder with my name typed across the front. I drove home in silence, the test results beside me on the passenger seat like a loaded weapon. The house looked the same from the outside, calm, orderly. But I knew better. I knew what waited behind the front door, and this time I walked in with both hands steady. Brooke had been waiting in the kitchen. She held a manila envelope like it was nothing more than paperwork for the recycling bin. "Just a standard power of attorney form," she said. "We should get ahead of things, just in case." I took the pen she offered, held it, turned it slowly between my fingers. Then I set it down and smiled. I told her I'd like someone to review it first, just in case my memory was slipping. Her smile faltered. She didn't answer. Just watched me walk away like I had forgotten something. But I hadn't forgotten anything. I was just getting started. That night, I baked banana bread and left it on the counter to cool. I took out the file from Dr. Patel and made 2 clean copies. One went into my binder, behind the medical tab. The other I sealed in an envelope and slid into my safety deposit box at the bank. I knew she'd try again, with paperwork, with sweet suggestions, with subtle questions about what year it was or what we had for dinner last night. But I was ready for every one of them, because she didn't realize that I wasn't playing defense. I was baiting the hook. Let them think I was drifting. Let them believe I was slowly fading into some soft, forgettable place. That was the beauty of it. The more they thought I was losing control, the more they loosened their grip. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to accuse. I just needed time. And I had that, along with memory, along with truth, along with a growing stack of proof and the kind of patience only a retired schoolteacher could wield like a scalpel. Every mistake I made from that point on was a choice. Every forgotten word, every misplaced item, every delayed response. They thought I was falling, but I was watching, and I was recording everything. I hadn't meant to find it. I was looking for the carving knife, the silver one that had belonged to my mother and only came out once a year for Thanksgiving. It should have been tucked in the cedar box at the back of the garage, the one labeled holiday flatware. Instead, I found a stack of Brooke's abandoned side hustle boxes. Half-torn shipping labels, crushed tissue paper, broken fake wreaths. I shifted them aside, careful not to make noise. That's when I saw the envelope. Plain, manila, taped to a black folder. I opened it slowly, not because I was suspicious, but because something in my chest had already started to sink. Inside was an appraisal document. Formal, crisp. It listed several pieces of jewelry, itemized, valued, photographed, and signed. Except the signature wasn't mine. I stood there in the cold garage, fingers tightening around the folder. The handwriting tried to mimic mine, but it leaned too far right, too forced. The loop in the L was wrong. My name was there, but not my hand. The pearl earrings Frank gave me after my first year teaching. The gold locket from my mother. The cameo pin I wore to Matt's graduation. All listed. All valued. All with notes in a familiar curling print. Good condition. Slight tarnish. Estate-worthy. Each photo had been taken against a blank white background. Carefully lit. These weren't just casual pictures. These were prepared for sale. I didn't shake. I didn't cry. I breathed. Deep, even, controlled. Then I slid everything back into the folder, pressed the flap down, and walked back inside. The house smelled like citrus cleaner and something synthetic. Brooke's scent. I carried the folder past the hallway mirror she'd hung in place of the family portraits and into my room. I pulled out the binder, the black one with the reinforced spine and labeled tabs. I opened it to a blank divider and wrote 2 words in blue ink: forgery and theft. I added the appraisal folder behind it. Every page went into its own sleeve. I included the envelope. I even took a photo of the cedar box, now half buried under those craft supplies. Then I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the carpet for a full minute. This wasn't erasure. This was removal. Piece by piece, she had moved from decorating to discarding, from suggestion to possession, and now, she was preparing to profit. I didn't tell Matt. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been buried under his silence. I didn't confront Brooke either. She thrived on attention. On theater. I wasn't giving her either. I spent the next morning scanning each page. Saved the files to the drive. I kept hidden in the flash drive at the bottom of the old garden toolbox. I buried it beneath the gravel where the roses used to bloom. Brooke had replaced them with ornamental stones and solar lights. She liked surfaces. I liked roots. When I came back inside, she was in the kitchen. She asked if I'd found the carving knife. I smiled and said not yet. She told me not to worry. They'd ordered a new one. Stainless steel, dishwasher safe. I nodded and went to make tea. When I opened the cabinet, my tea bags were gone, replaced with chamomile and something called immunity detox. I reached for the kettle and let the silence stretch. Let it curl around me like armor. This wasn't just about a house anymore. It wasn't about photos or quilts or names of rooms. It was about ownership, identity, and the subtle violence of being edited out of your own life. She thought I was weak, that I wouldn't notice, that the missing chair, the forwarded mail, the tone of her voice would blend together into forgetfulness. But I remembered everything, especially the way she looked when she thought I wasn't watching. That folder wasn't just paperwork, it was a window, and through it, I saw her clearly for the first time. Calculated, efficient, careful enough to hide things but not smart enough to hide them well. I boiled water and poured it slowly, let the steam rise as I traced the kitchen walls with my eyes. I remembered when Frank installed the cabinets, when Matt dropped a bottle of maple syrup that left a stain we could never scrub out. Those details weren't on any list, but they lived in the bones of this place, in me, in every corner she couldn't reach. That night, I updated my binder, added a note to the index, changed my backup location for the flash drive. I tightened the locks on my filing cabinet. I ran a backup scan and renamed the folder to a new title, Contingency A. I wasn't waiting for justice, I was building it. Quietly, carefully, the way I had built lesson plans, one objective at a time. And now, the objective was clear. She hadn't just crossed a line, she had signed my name without permission. That was the moment everything shifted. Because you can manipulate a person. You can humiliate them, isolate them, even make them doubt themselves. But when you commit a crime with their name on it, you hand them the match. And I was holding a binder full of kindling. Thanksgiving morning arrived wrapped in fog. The kind that settles low and thick, like the sky is holding its breath. I woke before the rest of the house stirred, slipped on my slippers, and moved through the kitchen like I used to when Matt was small. The turkey was already marinated. The pie crust chilled overnight. I basted slowly, steadily, humming an old hymn under my breath as the oven warmed the room. I didn't rush. I wanted everything to be just right. Quietly, methodically, I laid out the place cards, the linen napkins Brooke said were too dated, and polished the chipped wine glasses she'd once tried to throw out. My dress was velvet, deep plum, with long sleeves and a slight shimmer that caught the morning light. Frank always said it made me look like royalty. I laid it out the night before, along with a pearl brooch Brooke had removed from the hallway drawer and called unnecessary. I pinned it anyway. Brooke came into the kitchen mid-morning, full of gloss and performance. Her yoga set matched the apron. Her smile was tight. She looked me up and down and said something about hosting, not haunting. I smiled back and told her I'd be quiet as a ghost. Guests arrived around 2. Neighbors, Matt's co-workers, one of Brooke's friends from college who brought a fancy camera and snapped pictures of the table before the food was even set. I kept moving through the day like I had no bones to ache. Checked the stuffing, basted the turkey again, sliced the cranberry tart with precision. Nobody asked if I needed help. That was fine. I wasn't hosting for them. I was setting the stage. At 5 sharp, dinner was served. Turkey golden, potatoes fluffed, pie cooling by the window like a quiet witness. I took my seat at the end of the table, the one that used to belong to the matriarch. Now, apparently, it belonged to a prop. Conversation buzzed. Brooke talked about renovation plans. Matt stayed quiet, his fork moving more than his mouth. I passed the rolls, the green beans, the gravy boat that still bore a chip from 1998. Then it happened. I reached for the mashed potatoes, my second helping. I wasn't hungry, but I had waited for this moment. Halfway there, Brooke leaned forward, hand fast and controlled, and took the serving spoon from my grasp. She smiled wide and said I'd had enough. Her voice was honeyed, sharp at the edges. The table went still. She laughed and added something about starches and doctor's orders. I set my fork down. My hands didn't tremble. I picked up my wine glass, let the stem rest between my fingers. Took a slow, deliberate sip. Then I stood. The chair scraped against the floor, loud and final. Everyone turned. Brooke froze, the spoon still in her hand. Matt blinked like someone waking from a dream. I adjusted my sleeve, cleared my throat. Actually, I said, I haven't even started. The doorbell rang. The sound cut through the room like a knife through the pie no one had touched yet. I turned to the hallway and walked calmly, past the polished sideboard, past the mirror that had replaced my wedding portrait. I opened the front door. A man in a black coat stood there, envelope in hand. His voice was even professional. He asked for Brooke by full name, said he was a registered process server, formally serving eviction papers on behalf of the legal property owner. Behind me, the dining room held its breath. Brooke didn't speak. Her face drained to porcelain. Matt pushed back from the table so fast his chair tipped over. The baby started crying. Someone's wine glass rolled and clinked against a plate. I took another sip. Let the moment stretch. Oh, I said, just something I've been cooking longer than that turkey. The man handed Brooke the papers. She stood rooted to the floor. Everyone watched. No one moved. She finally snatched the envelope, muttered something about legality, and stormed down the hall. The bathroom door slammed. I turned back to the table, looked at each guest in turn, said nothing. I didn't have to. I had already said everything I needed to in silence, in paperwork, in timing. By sunset, the guests had scattered like birds startled from a wire. Empty plates sat untouched, napkins crumpled. Nobody wanted dessert. The pie sat intact, steam now just a memory. Matt hovered by the mantel, holding the eviction papers like he couldn't read them. Brooke stayed locked in the bathroom. The house, once so loud with control and performance, was silent. I didn't shout. I didn't break. I didn't cry. I just let the door close behind the process server, clicked the lock, and exhaled. Slowly, cleanly. For the first time in years. Thanksgiving had always been about gratitude. And this year, I was thankful for every line of that binder, every receipt, every note, every piece of evidence they never thought I'd notice. That night, I cleared the table alone, wrapped leftovers, rinsed the dishes. I left the pie out just a little longer, not because anyone would eat it, but because it felt like justice should be allowed to cool in peace. The house smelled like cinnamon and something sharper, like truth, like consequence, like the start of something that had been a long time coming. I thought it was over after Thanksgiving. Brooke left 3 days later, suitcase rolling behind her, her voice clipped and full of threats no one listened to. Matt stayed silent, too stunned or too proud to admit what had happened. I changed the locks, called the utility companies, and updated every account in my name. Then the letter came. A legal petition filed in Matt's name. He was contesting the revocable life estate, not for Brooke, not on her behalf. This time, it was his signature on the paperwork. My son, my only child. The same boy who once cried when he lost his lunchbox in 2nd grade. I didn't scream, I didn't pace. I sat at the kitchen table with the envelope open beside my tea and reread every word. Twice. Then I called Deborah. She listened, said one sentence, and told me we'd be ready. The courtroom was cold. Polished floors, high ceilings, light that made everything feel too clean. I wore the same plum dress from Thanksgiving. I chose it on purpose. I sat beside Deborah, my binder in my lap. Across from us, Matt sat with a woman in a gray suit who never looked up from her notes. He didn't make eye contact, not even once. When the judge entered, I stood with everyone else. She was in her 60s. Gray hair pulled back, eyes sharp as frost. She glanced over the room and called my name. I rose, binder still in hand, shoulders squared. I gave my son and his wife this house. My voice didn't shake. I said it was a gesture of love, not a surrender of rights, not an invitation to be erased from the life I helped build. I paused. Let the silence land. Let it echo in the corners of that pale room. I said I've lived through caretaking masked as control, gaslighting disguised as concern. I've been told I was forgetful while they rewrote my name out of every room. But I am not gone. I am not fragile. And I am not finished. The judge didn't blink. She asked if I had documentation. Deborah placed the binder on the table. Every tab labeled, every page dated. Evidence of ownership, evidence of manipulation, evidence of intent. Matt didn't speak. When asked if he wished to testify, he looked at the floor and shook his head. The judge asked again. He said no. Just that. The ruling came quickly. All documents were upheld. The revocable life estate was valid. The petition was denied. My legal rights were fully retained. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just let my breath out slowly, quiet as the moment after a storm passes. Deborah touched my elbow, told me it was over. But I knew better. It was only the end of their version of the story. Outside the courthouse, the air was sharp and clean. I looked up at the sky, pale blue with no clouds. Deborah handed me a cup of coffee, said one word, free. I nodded, not because I needed her to say it, but because I finally believed it myself, not just legally, but emotionally. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to justify existing in my own life. At home, I opened the front door without flinching. I stood on the threshold a moment longer than usual, just to feel it, the space, the stillness, the absence of fear. I put the binder back in the drawer, not because I was done with it, but because it had done its job. Truth didn't need to scream. It just needed to be recorded, protected, and spoken when the time was right. And I had done that, all of it, without rage, without revenge, with a memory no one could take from me. The house felt different now, not empty, not quiet, just ready. I could feel it in the way the light moved through the windows, the way the hardwood warmed under my bare feet, the way the air no longer carried someone else's permission. It had been weeks since the court hearing. I had gone back to my routines, but with a different kind of energy. I no longer stepped lightly or asked before touching what had always been mine. That Thanksgiving table had been set for performance. This one, I told myself, would be set for presence. I folded the cloth napkins myself. Mixed patterns. Nothing matched and nothing needed to. 12 chairs circled the table. A few were old and creaky. One came from the back porch. Another I borrowed from the neighbor across the street. They didn't all belong here, but they all had a place. The guests weren't family by blood, but by something else. A woman from the shelter down the road who had just filed for divorce. One of my students from the adult literacy program who had spent her 20s raising 5 kids alone. A cashier I saw every week at the grocery store who never stopped smiling, even when she was clearly tired. Each of them brought something. A casserole wrapped in foil. A mason jar of homemade jam. A bag of store-bought cookies with the receipt still folded inside. I made chicken pot pie, green beans with almonds, and cornbread the way Frank liked it. I lit the cinnamon candle Brooke once called too vintage, and placed it in the center of the table. We didn't toast. We didn't stand and take turns speaking. We just ate, passed the butter, asked about each other's week, laughed when someone spilled the gravy, and no one minded. One woman said she hadn't sat at a table like this in 5 years. Another said it reminded her of something she didn't know she missed. The room filled slowly with warmth. Not from the oven or the candle, but from something quieter. Safety, ease, a shared kind of peace. Someone pulled out a small bouquet of wildflowers. Just a handful of stems tied with twine. She placed it beside my plate and said nothing. I touched the petals gently. The colors were uneven, the stems were rough, but the arrangement was perfect. Near the end of the meal, I looked around the table. Women with tired hands and tired hearts. Women who had been left out, talked over, made invisible. But not tonight. Tonight, they were here. Whole, present, seen. My wine glass sat to my right. The same one Brooke once tried to throw away. Its rim still chipped, its body still strong. I ran my fingers along the edge, then lifted it slightly. I didn't say anything grand. Just let my eyes meet theirs. This table didn't always feel like mine. I said it quietly, but I carved it back, inch by inch, not for revenge, for peace. Someone clapped softly. Then another, not polite applause. Honest, gentle, like they knew exactly what I meant without needing the rest explained. After dinner, we didn't rush to clean. We lingered. Talked about jobs, about books, about nothing and everything. One woman offered to help me start a garden again. Another said she could bring over her son to fix the porch rail. It wasn't about favors. It was about connection. By the time the last guest left, the moon had come up. I stood at the door and waved, then returned to the dining room. The chairs were still slightly out of place, the plates not quite clean, but everything felt right. That night, for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a visitor in my own home. I felt like the host, not just of a dinner, of something fuller, of something alive. And I knew, deep down, that I hadn't just reclaimed a house. I had made space for something better, for people who saw me, for a new kind of family. I wrote the check on a Tuesday morning. The sun had just started to spill through the kitchen windows, soft and golden across the tile. I used the fountain pen Frank once gave me for our anniversary, and signed my name slowly, not because I hesitated, but because I wanted to feel every stroke. $50,000, made out to the local Women's Legal Defense Fund. I folded the check and slipped it into an envelope, then added a small note on plain white paper. For the next woman who refuses to be erased. Deborah met me at her office later that afternoon. She didn't ask any questions when I placed the envelope in her hands. She just nodded and smiled, the kind of smile that comes from knowing something has come full circle. I didn't do it for closure. I had already claimed that on my own terms. I did it because I knew there were others. Women sitting silently at kitchen tables, rewriting themselves to stay small. Women who needed someone to remind them they weren't alone. Back at home, the house was quiet. Not the heavy kind of silence, but the good kind. The kind that settles around you like a soft blanket. The kind that says, "This space is yours now." I lit the cinnamon candle and placed it on the mantel, the same spot where Brooke once insisted on a marble sculpture that never felt right. The scent rose through the air, warm and familiar. Outside the window, the garden had begun to bloom again. Roses in deep red, a few in soft yellow, and one stubborn ivory bush that refused to die. I had started watering it every morning, named it Eleanor. It leaned toward the light no matter how cold the nights got. I sat in my chair by the window. The one Brooke once said was too bulky. I had sanded and restained it myself last spring. It creaked a little, but it held me. The binder was tucked away now, not hidden, just resting, like a tool no longer needed but never forgotten. I took a sip of tea and let the warmth spread, not just in my hands but deeper, into places that had gone quiet for too long. This wasn't about winning. It was about being whole again, about leaving something behind that mattered. The next time someone asked what I'd do with a quiet house and all this space, I'd have an answer. I'd say I made room for peace, and I passed the light forward.